Hi, welcome to today's video. My name is Paul. So this week, again, you can see I'm doing some charcoal and soft pastel landscape painting. And this week I'm also going to do something I don't often do on the channel, and that's kind of a tutorial. Tutorial might be overdoing things a little bit, but I'm at least going to try and talk through what I'm doing with this painting, or at least what I'm trying to do. So there's several stages to the painting. Stage one is getting the big shapes. So it's focusing on the composition. First line that I draw in is going to separate the land from the sky. And that's a big part of the composition, of course. The shape of that line, try to make it interesting, not just a single width, single width line, but remember, if you're using things like charcoal, soft pastels, pencils and other media, especially dry media, you can vary the weight, the amount of pressure that you put onto the medium that you're using, and lift things off a little bit, push down a little bit more. This is going to create a more interesting line than just a constant weight, constant width sort of line. Stage two then is when I start adding in color. With color, sometimes I'll sort of stick to local color. So local color just means if you asked a child what color is the sky, they would probably say blue, or what color is the grass, they would probably say green. That's local color. It's the colors that we often associate with objects in a landscape, or anything else for that matter. So I'll be using mostly earthy colors and greens in the land, and mostly blue and white in the sky. But it's not completely like that, so I am adding in a bit of light blue and things into the landscape. I mainly use local color, but not entirely. And I don't use color necessarily as a representational thing. It's an artistic thing. Also, with color, I would try to use a limited palette. So not trying to use too many colors. The more colors that you use, the less harmonious the final result will be. In general. Not always true. That's not necessarily a bad thing, it's a choice. I prefer to use a limited palette because then you end up with something that's slightly more harmonious, at least in terms of color, and it's less challenging for the viewer, let's put it that way. If you have something that's there's lots of dissonance in the painting and there's really no general color scheme, you have lots of clashing colors and things, that's fine if that's the way you want to go, but be aware that a lot of people will look at it and decide they don't like it just simply because of the colors. You're challenging the viewer more, maybe. Other things I can say is, as usual, I don't use any sort of reference. I don't like references. Okay, if you're trying to draw or paint a specific landmark or something, then yeah, you kind of have to use some sort of reference. But other than that, I don't like using photographs especially. As soon as you use a photograph, everything tightens up and there's so many details and it's harder to see the big shapes. When you don't have a reference, everything is so much easier, I find anyway. Plus, of course, if you're not using other people's references, other people's photographs, you've no problem with copyright infringement. A lot of people will use just any old photograph they see on the internet and perhaps forget that that belongs to someone else. You don't have the rights to use other people's images. It's fine if you're just keeping it for yourself, just for practice, but if you're going to try and sell it or make a print from it or anything like that, yeah, you're breaking copyright laws then. So there are some advantages to not using a reference. Other than that, keeping things simple, trying to work fast, not getting too bogged down in details and things like that. This is scan of the final painting. I say very simple color scheme, and almost devoid of details. There's a few little marks in the foreground that suggest some detail. The other thing I would say is making marks. Remember, so I mentioned at the start, you can make lines more interesting by varying the weight, the pressure that you put onto the material, the medium that you're using. But you can also, something like a soft pastel or charcoal, one of those Derwent blocks, you can move things around. You can use the flat edge, you can use the sharp edge, you can create different kinds of marks, and they can be interesting. And also the direction of the mark, horizontal, vertical, diagonal, all of these things are important, especially if the marks are still visible in the final painting. Think about how you're making the marks on the paper. And then maybe one other last thing I would say is don't be afraid to let the paper show through as well. This is part of the reason why I use toned paper. If I was using white paper, you get a bit of a clash between the color and the white. With the toned paper, it all sort of merges in. There's no sharp clash, I don't think, between the areas where there's a bit of color and the areas where there's no medium added. Okay, and one final thing is take everything I just said with a huge pinch of salt, because it's just my opinions. It's the way I do things, and I'm not for 1 second pretending or saying that this is how you should paint. Each of us has to find our own style, our own way of doing things. I'm just saying this is how I do it because it might be of some interest to some people. By all means, be inspired by other people, but be careful of just trying to copy them. You can learn a certain amount by copying or studying other people's art, but I wouldn't leave that as your final goal. It's just the first step towards creating your own style, I think. Okay, if you made it this far in the video, thank you for watching, and hopefully see you in next week's video.